Mandy Stavik was highly accomplished and never limited herself to mastering just one thing. The honors student at Mount Baker High School played both varsity basketball and varsity softball, and also ran track. She was fluent in sign language and could speak Japanese. She played 3 instruments, clarinet, flute, and saxophone, in the school band. She was brave, independent, and driven. After graduating high school in 1989, 18-year-old Mandy went on to Central Washington University. Her initial career goal was to become a commercial pilot, but she was beginning to rethink her plans by the middle of her first semester of college. That November, she returned to her family home in Clipper, Washington, just outside the small town of Acme, for her Thanksgiving break. The day after Thanksgiving, November 24th, 1989, Mandy decided to go for a run, and left the house around 2:30 in the afternoon. Normally, her mother, Mary, would ride her bike alongside Mandy while she ran, but on that day, Mary decided to stay home because her sister was visiting. Mandy was accompanied on her run by just the family dog, a German Shepherd named Kyra. At home, Mandy's route for her daily runs took her down the street her family's house was on, Strand Road. She would run down to where the road dead-ended at the Nooksack River, and then turn around to run home. Mandy's brother, Lee, had been visiting a friend that afternoon at a house on Strand Road between Highway 9 and the Stavik home. While he was there, he saw his sister running by, on her way back to their house. She had less than half a mile to go before she would reach it. But Mandy never arrived home. 2 hours later, Kyra arrived back at the house, without Mandy and visibly upset. Mary Stavik's first instinct was to call Mandy's boyfriend, Rick Zender, to see if he knew where she was. He did not. She then called the sheriff, and everyone she knew in the area, to begin the search for Mandy. Almost every member of the small rural community eventually helped look for Mandy. People searched on foot, on horseback, and on all-terrain vehicles. A local tracker tried to work with Kyra, the German Shepherd, hoping that she would lead them back to Mandy. However, Kyra would cower in fear upon stepping off of the porch of the family home. Kyra was an older dog, but still very protective of her family. She may have been kicked or hit when she tried to defend Mandy against an assailant, resulting in the change in her behavior when she arrived home. On November 26th, a search team covering small side roads discovered a pair of green sweatpants. Mandy had been wearing teal sweatpants and a light-colored sweatshirt when she left for her run. Mary Stavik did not believe that the sweatpants the search team found belonged to her daughter, but they were still submitted to the crime lab for analysis. Lab tests would eventually show that the pants were unrelated to the case. The following day, November 27th, 1989, Mandy was finally found, but the discovery did not bring her family peace. A local fire department had been searching the Nooksack River with one of their boats. They located Mandy's body in the South Fork of the river, caught up in some debris, 6 miles away from her home. She was wearing only her socks and shoes. Her clothing and the Walkman she had been using on her run have never been found. An autopsy would later determine that Mandy had been raped and that she had died from asphyxia by drowning. There were no signs of a struggle on the riverbank near where she was found, and the water was very shallow in that stretch of the river. Mandy was also a very strong swimmer who had worked as a lifeguard. These factors led investigators to believe that Mandy had not been conscious when she went into the water. This was further supported by a wound on the top of her head that the medical examiner believed would have rendered her unconscious. Mandy also had numerous scratches and lacerations on her legs, as though she had run through dense brush or the thorny blackberry bushes that were common in the area while not wearing pants. Unfortunately, Mandy was not the first of her siblings to be murdered. In 1975, her oldest brother Brent had been killed on property owned by the Fort Richardson Army Base just outside of Anchorage, where he was authorized to go hunting. He had been shot 17 times. His killer has still never been found. Mandy, her mother, and her 2 remaining siblings then moved to Washington State from Alaska, while Mandy was still very young. following her parents' divorce. More than 1,000 people attended Mandy's memorial service. There was not a church in the area large enough to hold that many people, so the service was held at the high school Mandy had graduated from just a few months before. The obvious first suspect in the case was Mandy's boyfriend, Rick. The couple had been dating for 3.5 years, but the relationship was on and off for some of that time. However, Rick was eager to cooperate with police, who described him as being extremely forthcoming when he gave his statement to them. He was eventually cleared of any involvement in the case. In 1989, DNA testing was still a relatively new technique, especially in the criminal justice field. Luckily for the Stavik family, Ron Peterson of the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office had just returned from a training at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, about how DNA could be used by law enforcement. Most state and local crime labs were not equipped to identify and sequence DNA evidence, but the FBI's lab was. Samples from Mandy's body were sent to the FBI lab, and they were able to isolate Mandy's DNA sequence, and that of an unknown male. Investigators followed up on more than 7,000 leads and tried to connect Mandy's case to other crimes all over the Northwest, but the case still went cold. In 2009, Detective Kevin Bowie inherited the case, becoming the third person to lead the investigation. His strategy for trying to solve the now 20-year-old case, inspired by a famous case in England, was simple. Identify all of the men living in the area at the time of the murder, and test all of their DNA until they found a match. Because Mandy had lived in a rural area with a small population, this theoretically could be done. In practice, however, it was obviously much more difficult to do. Over the next 4 years, the Whatcom County Sheriff's Office was able to test dozens of DNA samples, but none of them were a match to the DNA from the crime scene. However, around this time, they were also able to identify a potential new suspect, who had never spoken to the police about the case: Timothy Bass. Timothy Bass had lived a few doors down from the Staviks in 1989. People who knew him then have said that he was very quiet and kept to himself. He had moved away shortly after Mandy's murder, and had gotten married just 2 months after her death. By 2013, he and his wife had 3 children, and were living in Everson, Washington. Investigators traveled to Everson to speak with Timothy about the case. He claimed to not remember it, or Mandy's name. This made the investigators immediately suspicious of him. Mandy's murder had been major news in her small, and previously very safe, town. Mandy had also gone to the same high school as Timothy, and had been friends with his younger brother Tom. A witness would later reveal that Timothy had also started attending basketball games at the high school when Mandy was on the team to watch her play. Mandy also ran past his house almost every single day when she was not at college. Timothy refused to provide a voluntary DNA sample. Police, however, still wanted to compare Timothy Bass's DNA to the DNA from the crime scene, so they went to his employer to ask for help. Timothy worked as a local delivery driver for the Franz bakery outlet. Investigators met with Kim Wagner, who managed the outlet. They told her that they were investigating an employee and wanted access to information about their delivery routes so that they could follow the employee and potentially collect a cigarette butt or some other discarded item with DNA on it. Kim felt as though she was not in a position to comply with this request, and asked the investigators to consult with Human Resources at their corporate office. The corporate office, in turn, asked for a subpoena or search warrant to share that information. Authorities asked Tim Bass for a voluntary sample again in 2015, and again he refused. A few years after her conversation with the police, an offhand remark would change Kim Wagner's mind about getting involved in the case. She and her husband were out at a bar, talking with a friend about her co-workers. The friend happened to be an acquaintance of Timothy Bass, and the group began discussing his eccentricities. The friend mentioned to Kim that Timothy had lived on the same street as Mandy Stavik when she was killed. Kim then realized that Timothy and the Mandy Stavik case must have been the reason investigators had come to speak with her in 2013. When authorities returned to try to get information from the bakery outlet again in 2017, Kim confronted them with her suspicions about what they were investigating. She also told them Timothy Bass's assigned delivery route. This information did not immediately help the authorities get Timothy's DNA. He wore gloves, so his DNA was not left on any of the bread he delivered, and he did not smoke, so he never discarded cigarette butts. He took his trash home instead of leaving it in his delivery truck, and he was the bakery's only employee who did not turn in his uniform to be laundered by the company. His conversations with police seemed to have concerned him enough that he carefully guarded any source of DNA that could be covertly collected. Kim Wagner offered to collect a discarded DNA sample from Timothy inside the bakery building. However, police told her that this would not be possible. It would be illegal for them to ask a civilian to collect evidence on their behalf. However, on August 10, 2017, Kim Wagner watched as Timothy Bass drank out of a plastic cup and discarded it in a trash can, along with a can of Coke. After he walked away, Kim decided to collect the items out of the trash can and hide them in a bag in her desk. She then turned the items over to the police. Kim was so motivated to help in the case because she, like the rest of the community, had been horrified by Mandy's murder. Kim was just 19 at the time of the murder, just 1 year older than Mandy. By 2017, Kim also had another reason for wanting the case to be closed. She had a daughter of her own, and was haunted by the idea of Mary Stavik never finding out who had taken her daughter from her. The evidence Kim provided was submitted to the crime lab for DNA testing. These tests showed that the DNA Timothy Bass left on the cup when he drank from it matched the DNA found inside of Mandy. Timothy Bass was arrested on December 12, 2017. On Mary Stavik's 81st birthday, Whatcom County Sheriff Bill Elfo knocked on her door and told her that an arrest had finally been made in her daughter's case. Following his arrest, Timothy Bass originally stuck to the story he had been giving to police since 2013. He did not know Mandy, and he had never so much as kissed her. However, once it became clear to him that police had somehow gotten his DNA, he changed his story. He now claimed that he had a consensual sexual relationship with Mandy, which is why his DNA was on her body. Timothy claimed that he had met Mandy before she left for college, while he and his father were out mountain biking. His father had since passed away and could not confirm the story. Timothy says that he and Mandy began spending time together just talking, and eventually began casually having sex. They had sex again when Mandy was home for Thanksgiving. Timothy could not, however, provide any basic information about Mandy, and not one witness was ever found who had seen the two of them together. There were no phone calls or letters between Mandy and Timothy after she left for college. Police did not believe Timothy's new story. Leading up to his trial, Timothy's defense lawyers tried to get all DNA evidence excluded. They argued that police had first obtained their client's DNA illegally because they asked a civilian to gather it for them. Police can legally collect items that someone has thrown away, but they cannot enlist civilians to do it for them. The lawyers argued that because Kim had previously met with authorities, she was acting on their behalf when she collected the cup and the can from the garbage. Kim Wagner appeared at a hearing and testified that collecting the items had been her own idea, and that she had done it of her own accord. It is legal for civilians to turn over potential evidence that they legally obtain to authorities. A judge ruled in August of 2018 that Kim had not been acting on behalf of law enforcement when she collected and turned over the items, and the DNA evidence remained admissible. When Timothy went on trial for first-degree murder in May of 2019, his defense was based on his claim that he had a consensual relationship with Mandy. The presence of his DNA inside of her body, his lawyers argued, therefore meant nothing. Timothy had no proof of this relationship, however, and as the trial progressed, it became more and more evident that his word did not carry a lot of value. Timothy's soon-to-be ex-wife, who had been his girlfriend at the time of Mandy's murder, testified that her husband, against whom she had previously applied for an order of protection, had threatened her into providing him with a false alibi for the day of the murder. It was also revealed that when Timothy's family came to visit him in jail after his arrest, he had slipped them a note, in which he asked his mother to lie to the police, telling them that he had been Christmas shopping with her the day of the murder. He also tried to convince his mother to blame the crime on his dead father. She would not let him. The most troubling testimony of all, however, came from Timothy's own brother, Tom. Tom Bass testified that in 2015, after authorities asked Timothy to volunteer a DNA sample for the second time, Timothy had asked him to lie to the police for him. Timothy told his younger brother that he had sex with Mandy the weekend of Thanksgiving. He wanted him to go to the police and say that he also had sex with Mandy. Timothy wanted to make it appear as though Mandy was, in his terms, a loose girl, so that the police would believe his story about him having consensual casual sex with her. Tom, who had been friends with Mandy, refused to go along with the plan. On May 24th, 2019, almost 30 years after Mandy's murder, a jury found Timothy Bass guilty of first-degree murder after less than a day of deliberation. Mary Stavik and the rest of Mandy's family was in the courtroom when the verdict was read. On July 2nd, a judge imposed the maximum sentence of 320 months, or almost 27 years, in prison. Timothy is planning to appeal his conviction. Every year since 1990, a scholarship has been awarded in Mandy's name to a Mount Baker High School student active in the school's music program. The funding for the scholarship includes the $25,000 the community raised to offer as a reward for information that led to the arrest of Mandy's killer. That money was donated to the scholarship fund after years had gone by with no arrest in the case. Even without the incentive of a reward, Mandy's case was finally solved thanks to the impact her life and death had on her community and the persistence of Mandy's family and the investigators.